I welcome you all again for the SNAP webinar 2. This is a part of a series of technical knowledge sharing which we have gathered over years and in discussions with our customers and from our R&D center, the trials we have conducted. And we have successfully completed our first webinar on nodularization treatment, which is available in our YouTube channel, which was done in the last month. So subsequently, we have going to talk about inoculation and the history of inoculation today. We'll be discussing about how inoculants evolved and the process of inoculation evolved. So this presentation will be talking about the history of inoculation, the basic ingredients of inoculation, what could have been the first inoculant, and the modern day inoculants which we are right now using, and what was the need for evolution, like how did the inoculation process and the type of inoculants evolve, the mechanism behind the inoculation and how it works in cast iron and ductile iron, gray cast iron and ductile iron, guidelines for the inoculant selection, how the inoculants can be selected for different parameters and different requirements, and how are inoculants being evaluated, the different measures and the parameters against which inoculants performance can be measured, and the future. So as I was discussing, the first inoculant being used was foundry sweepings. Like when we went into the literature about the history of inoculation, we came to know that the first inoculation as a process was being followed or was invented by, which was merely an accident, which was invented by this Meehan Foundry, which was in USA, and they have added the foundry sweepings back into the metal, and luckily they were finding the casting performance improving. So later they have tried to have this as a controlled practice, and then they have started patenting in their own name. So in order to improve this foundry sweepings, they have tried adding calcium silicide and some other various mixtures in conjunction with one other foundry, Newcastle Foundry in UK. So they have mixed the calcium silicide, crushed ferrosilicon and graphite together, and they made a proprietary mix and they patented in the name of Meehanite. The basic ingredients of the first inoculant, very first inoculant, which is a patented process, was comprising of graphite, calcium silicide, and crushed ferrosilicon. So the question would be, if these were the basic ingredients, then why are they not being used today? Why are they not put into use today? Because we don't have any, we don't see any of these being used as inoculant separately or in combination with either of these three. So let's go into graphite. So graphite is usually generally crystalline, or it should be crystalline in structure to give better inoculating effect. But crystalline graphite is comparatively expensive, and its availability is comparatively less, and amorphous graphite form is available more. And the source for this is generally naturally occurring graphite and graphite electrode scrap. Though the graphite was found to produce extremely high eutectic cell count, like the performance of an inoculant, like inoculant is supposed to increase the eutectic cell count, which thereby increases the amount of graphite getting precipitated. There was a problem in getting inconsistent results out of graphite addition. Also, we have a problem in the dissolution, where the graphite melting point is found to be very high compared to our operating temperatures. So because of this, the dissolution became non-uniform, and when, as we know very well, that when an inoculant dissolution is non-uniform, its performance would be non-uniform. So this mixture, or if you have graphite or if you use graphite as an inoculant, we'll be getting non-uniform inoculating effect, where some parts of the casting or some places will be better and some places will be bad. So per se, graphite is an inoculating material, but it's not a uniform inoculating material. So this might not be a suitable inoculant which can be applied to different applications. Then comes calcium silicide. So calcium silicide has got calcium and silicon, which forms a major component of inoculating elements. But there is a problem that calcium silicide can have calcium oxide as impurities. So when these impurities get into our liquid metal, this can lead to formation of dross or inclusion when we cast. So though calcium oxide slag is or the dross is easily removable, but we do not, as we are working towards high purity liquid metal, which in turn gives good castings. So it would be better if we could avoid having surface impurities or impurities along with the coming along with the inoculant. Crushed ferrosilicon. Ferrosilicon is a material which contains typically 50 to 75% silicon, balance being iron. The pure ferrosilicon's melting point is around 1210 degrees Celsius, and it dissolves faster in the liquid metal because our operating temperature will be 1350 or 1400 degrees Celsius. Because of this, ferrosilicon, just ferrosilicon, without the special alloying elements like barium, strontium, zirconium, manganese, these elements, ferrosilicon does produce some inoculating effect, but it is not a sustaining nuclei which can lead to good inoculating effect, like a prolonged pouring time or section sensitivity in the casting coming up. So ferrosilicon also gives some nuclei. That means it has some inoculating effect, but it is not a consistent or a very potent inoculant when we talk of. So if ferrosilicon is not a good inoculant, or if ferrosilicon cannot be used as a better inoculant, then why are the recent or modern day inoculants are ferrosilicon based? As we had seen in the previous slide, ferrosilicon's melting temperature or dissolution temperature will be close to 1210 degrees Celsius. So as it dissolves faster, so the first property of requirement of an inoculant is like the inoculant should dissolve in the given operating temperature. It should not give any residue. So it has got iron and silicon. So it is not; those are not foreign elements to castain. So these elements do not create any harmful effect to the liquid metal. And ferrosilicon helps in giving silicon, which works like a carrier of other inoculating elements. Like for barium or calcium or cerium or any other inoculating elements to work, silicon plays like a supporting character. Like when we go into the mechanism or formation or mechanism of inoculation happening, we'll come to know the importance of silicon. So then we'll be understanding why ferrosilicon alone is not sufficient, or we cannot, or we can come to understanding that why ferrosilicon is important, or silicon is important in the inoculation process. So there is one other material called silicon carbide, which also contains silicon and carbon, and there are some reasons why silicon carbide is not being used. So silicon carbide has got irregular morphologies, and those are comparatively coarser compared ferrosilicon or ferrosilicon based. Size is not the constraint, but size has an impact on the performance of the material. So any material can be crushed down to any size required, but inoculants in modern days they are being used at finer levels at the late stage inoculation, the second stage, third stage inoculant inside the mold inoculation is being practiced today in modern foundries. So in such cases, silicon carbide might not be as effective in the finer size, as well as at a later stage, silicon carbide might not support in better nucleation. Also, the dissolution effect of silicon carbide, where silicon carbide has got a very high melting point of 2730, and its dissolution is slow in liquid metal. As we know, like people tend to add silicon carbide to the solid charge, or they call it all melt stage, where the metal is about to get liquid, and they add silicon carbide to that level and wait for silicon and carbon to diffuse into liquid metal and then start giving its effect. So it is a prolonged process, or it's a time dependent process. So it is again dependent on the time factor. So if you tend to add silicon carbide later or earlier, you start getting different effects. So silicon carbide has got silicon and carbon, which are major elements which supports nucleation or inoculation effect, but silicon carbide is not a consistent or a it can be a support to an inoculating material, but not as the primary inoculating material. Also, silicon carbide has got some gangue or residue material, which when after dissolution can become an inclusion in the casting. So it can get carried away along with the material or liquid metal and can enter the casting and lead to other inclusion defects, which is generally not present or not happening with conventional ferrosilicon based inoculants. So what are modern day inoculants? So all these modern day inoculants are basically ferrosilicon based. So the basic matrix will be iron and silicon. On top of it, you will be having controlled levels of different elements being added. Like calcium silicon inoculant will have a controlled level of calcium. Titanium based inoculant will be basically titanium rich, and barium calcium will be in different levels of barium and calcium. The same way zirconium manganese, zirconium calcium, strontium based material, bismuth based, lanthanum and cerium based. So these are different types of, and there are inoculants being developed with antimony, which performs similar to bismuth. So these elements are being selected from this periodic table, and these elements are generally strong oxidizing elements, and whose oxides are generally stable at the operating temperatures of foundries. So these are strong oxide formers. That means it deoxidizes the metal faster. So when you add these elements into it, it reacts with the nascent oxygen present in the liquid metal and starts forming oxides. And these oxides again form complex oxysilicates or oxyaluminates, like the complex compound upon which the graphite can precipitate and then start growing. So these elements form compounds which forms the platform for the graphite to precipitate. So the carbon is somehow going to come out of the liquid metal, as we know the solidification process, and as the solidification process goes on, carbon starts coming out of the liquid metal and it starts depositing, and it needs a constant or a stable platform in the operating temperature for it to convert into graphite. If that doesn't happen, then that carbon which is coming out again reacts with or forms compound with iron or any carbide forming element in the metal and starts giving a combined carbon, like we call it as carbides. It can be either iron carbide or any metallic carbides. So if these elements are being selected as inoculating elements, and why can't those elements be added as pure form? So we all know that the alloying, the requirement of alloying is to bring down, or generally the alloying brings down the melting point of the material. So pure elements have a comparatively higher melting point and boiling points than its alloy form, generally, not all, but generally. And the recoveries of pure elements are sometimes lesser, because when we talk of oxidizing elements, so if it is in the purer form, the elements start getting oxidized more, or the loss due to which the oxidation happens to this element will be more. Say, for example, if we consider calcium, calcium gets oxidized as calcium oxide and forms a whitish scale on top of calcium. So if calcium is present in the alloy form, like an inoculant with calcium inside, so the recovery of calcium or the loss of calcium will be less compared to adding pure calcium to the liquid metal. Because what happens is, in an alloy form, you have group of elements and not just the calcium alone. But in a pure form, you just have calcium, where the loss will be more. That is why when we compare pure elements of oxidizing nature, pure elements start giving less recovery due to oxidation. And also there are some ill effects of these pure elements, like some elements give some bad effects, like it can have a degenerating effect, or it can have some ill effects when added in more. So if there is an alloy system happening, one or the other element in the alloy system can counteract or subdue the ill effects of these pure elements. So why are there so many types of inoculants available today than early? So we see maybe foundrymen or experienced foundrymen who have been casting 10 years or 20 years ago, there were not these many types of inoculants available. Like they would be primarily having a basic inoculant like silicon based or calcium based. But now everyone, like people are trying to come up with new types of inoculation process or new types of inoculants by adding different chemical combinations, where you tend to apply every inoculant to meet the specific requirements of a foundry. Previously, it could have been like there should be no carbides in the casting, but now the requirements of casting has changed over years, and the rejection levels or the control or tightness or soundness requirement of the casting has increased over years, and now customers are asking about what we have learned is almost targeting zero rejection or nil rejection or always first time right in any trial castings happening. So there is no scope for error. There is no scope for rejections coming up. So specific requirements, specific casting requirements or casting improvements have led to developments or improvements happening in inoculation field also. So as the casting requirements improve or increases, the need for inoculation or the effectiveness of the inoculation has to improve, and that is why there are so many inoculants available today rather than basic inoculants which were available previously. So the reasons for evolution could be like change in the casting design over period, like where people are trying to cast thin sections, like thinner than previous, to achieve the same strength, or like reducing the weight of the casting by reducing the thickness and achieving the same strength, like improving the strength to weight ratio kind of. And change in the chemistry, like previously the amount of purity of charge mix which was available that time and the amount of purity which is being demanded today is improving. So when the purity of charge mix changes, or the difference in chemistry and different types of grades come into picture, the requirement of inoculant and the requirement of achieving property varies. So that could have been a driving factor where different types of inoculants could have come into picture. Because of the above two factors, one inoculant cannot perform or cannot do all works, like for various section thicknesses, a single inoculant cannot support giving equal or uniform properties throughout. So inoculation has evolved to meet the evolving requirements of the foundries. So when we say there are two types of factors, so there has been an improvement in the design factor, there has been an improvement in the metallurgical factor also. So when on the design front, there are variety of castings like thin section, thick section castings, like riserless castings have come into picture. There are people who cast riserless castings, and increasing the complexity of the castings. When, say for example, when a component being manufactured in a different route is getting converted into casting, like a forged component or a rolled component. Generally, forged component gets converted into casting material. So when such kind of conversion happens, people try to get the final product immediate, like in the as cast stage. So the complexity of the casting increases. So when the complexity increases, the castings become prone to section sensitivity. So inoculants will have to perform or will have to ensure uniform properties over these complexities. So when we talk of metallurgical factors, then change in the quality of raw materials and tramp elements level in the metal. So when there are more or different types of scraps being generated over and over, and as there has been like evolution happening in all the engineering industries, so steel scrap or the pig iron or the other foundry raw materials what we get have become more diversified, and there are more amount of scrap being generated and different kinds of scrap, and even the scrap quality has evolved over years. So when these many variations or these many evolutions happening in the input raw material side, so any ill effects of these evolution will also have to be taken care by the inoculation and stringent customer requirements over time. So we have tried classifying the or we have tried making the evolution chronologically. When the initial castings got converted into forgings, there would have been requirement like the initial alloy inoculant, like the calcium silicide, ferrosilicon, and then graphite, the mix of all these three. And when there were evolution where variety of grades of castings were being produced, like different grades of castings came into picture, and then the requirement would have been consistency. In that case, this combination or these three alloys would have become a single alloy. And when this single alloy was made with elements from mixtures, like when this single alloy was made with different elements, by doping by adding special elements to this single alloy, like based on the ferrosilicon alloy, you add calcium to it, it becomes a single inoculant. But this again, ferrosilicon inoculant with some calcium might not have satisfied all the customer requirements or all the casting requirements at that time. So when there was increase in productivity required, that means when more number of castings were being cast, when the user sector increased, or when the casting intakes increase, then productivity increases. So when productivity increases, then the demand for casting and good quality casting increase. So the single inoculant would not have served the purpose. So there has been an evolution happening. So a new element getting added, like barium getting added. So then when you have different section thicknesses of the casting, where the complexity of the casting would have varied, then there would have been new element getting added. This would have been a zirconium based inoculant coming up. When we talk of zirconium is a high melting element. So when zirconium gets added to it, your overall melting point of the inoculant increases. So to control that, there could have been an element addition which controls the melting point. When you add manganese to your inoculant, your overall melting point of the alloy comes down. So if melting point and dissolution of inoculants is a problem, you add manganese to it, and then you came up with the zirconium manganese inoculant. And when there was a need for weight reduction in the castings, then when you go for thin section castings manufacture, that too particularly in gray cast iron. So there has been an evolution where you have had a strontium based inoculant. And when you have intricate complex shapes where thin and thick section castings come up into picture, there has been a combination of zirconium based inoculant, zirconium coming into picture, and then zirconium and strontium combination. So it's a strontium zirconium based inoculant. So these are inoculants which could have come into picture when the requirements of the castings were on the left side, like the factors and how the inoculants evolved. There is another factor, or the classification of factors, where the evolution of inoculants could have happened. So initial method of inoculation would be has been was foundry sweepings. So it was a single stage inoculant. We call it as single stage inoculant. When the inoculant's effectiveness and productivity was the major factor or the concern, and people would have understood the fading phenomena where the inoculant fades over time. And when the people started understanding the fading phenomena, and people would have started using late inoculation, like splitting the inoculant into two stage inoculation, or adding inoculant closer to the poring area. So when late inoculation was being practiced, and there are people would have split the inoculant into two, adding it in first stage and second stage, or having an in-mold inoculation. So these are factors, or the process factors, process criteria, which would have led evolution of inoculants happen. So we have been talking about inoculation, but when we talk of inoculation, it is to the liquid metal. And where is the inoculation generally being added is to the liquid metal in the ladle or while filling into the mold. So in that case, can we do any inoculation in the furnace? So inoculation is generally expected to be done only in the ladle or during, because as we know, the inoculation effect fades over time, even though there are potent inoculants whose fade resistance is low, but it is not zero. So inoculants do fade in their performance, in their requirements, or in their ability to give enough nuclei. So it is expected, or it is suggested, to add inoculant as late as possible. So it is generally being done in the ladle addition, or when you pour into the mold. But what if we can improve the condition of the furnace metal itself? Say, for example, even you have a very potent, or you have a very good inoculant with you, but you don't have your metal where it can respond to your inoculant. Like, say if your metal is bad. See, here the term bad means the metal which has got less potency for nuclei formation. So if you have such kind of metal, any amount of good inoculation you do, you'll still end up with defects. So it is that you have to tame, or you have to get your metal accustomed to the inoculant, and you have to ensure that your metal is most responsive to the inoculation you do. Only then you can work on adding less inoculant, or getting the maximum benefit out of the inoculant we add. So that way you can condition your metal using similar materials, what is being called as inoculants, which we call it as preconditioners. So these are materials which has the similar, or which performs in a similar way as inoculant, but in a larger scale, where you condition your furnace metal itself, and you ensure that your metal is going to respond to your inoculant you are going to add in the future. That means down the line in the ladle, or in transfer, or during the in-mold inoculation. So with this inoculant addition, with this preconditioner addition, you will ensure that your liquid metal coming out of the furnace is uniform or is potent enough for responding to your inoculation. This way, you can long run not just getting the metallurgical or the chemical, not just getting benefit in the performance of the inoculant, you can also have some economics or cost benefit out of it. Like long run, if your metal is good, then your inoculation demand from the metal comes down, and in long run you can reduce your inoculation addition rate also. So initially it might look like adding cost to your treatment or adding cost to your metal, but long run, if we see when in the rejections front, your rejections due to the metallurgical factors comes down, your requirement of inoculation comes down, you will be so confident in pouring the liquid metal from your furnace that every time my furnace metal is the same. So irrespective of any variation in the charge mix or variation in the first tapping to the last tapping, my castings are all going to be the same. So if you get that amount of confidence, then you can blindly pour the liquid metal into the casting and get uniform castings throughout the year or 24/7. So that is what these preconditioners are aiming at. So let us talk about this. This slide will give some brief introduction or some explanation on how inoculants work in grey casting. So we have conducted some SEM analysis. We have tried looking for the core or the nucleus in the grey casting sample. And when we went deep into the microstructure, which was close to around 20,000 X in a grey castine sample, we could find a small gray area which is marked in red, which showed presence of calcium, aluminium, and oxygen. So in conjunction with the literatures, the nuclei in the grey castine is generally calcium and aluminum based. So it's either aluminates or calcium oxides. So then the nuclei, the shell which is formed around the micronucleus are basically manganese and sulfur. So this manganese and sulfur is present from your liquid metal. So we add manganese and sulfur. There is a ratio being followed where the amount of manganese required to balance the sulfur in the required way, like 1.7 times of the manganese requirement minimum will be 1.7 times of the sulfur plus 0.3 or 0.5. There is a thumb rule or theoretical formula. And other than this MNS shell, there are other elements getting added when we do inoculation, like this barium, strontium, zirconium, or calcium inoculants. When we add these inoculants, these elements combine with manganese and form this shell, the sulfur compound. It's a complex compound. It is not stoichiometrically MNS, and it's not stoichiometrically barium sulfide also. It is in a different ratio between manganese and sulfur. So these elements, inoculating elements, when you add barium-based inoculant or strontium-based inoculant, it combines with the manganese present in the liquid metal and start forming a shell around the nuclei which is present in the liquid metal. So when we see this entire picture, you need calcium, you need aluminium, you need barium and strontium. So if you have an inoculant without barium and strontium and you consider this scenario, you will still be having some calcium and aluminium which is in a trace amount. So if the calcium and aluminium is in trace amount, then the micronuclei formed also will be in the trace amount. And if you don't have this X, like barium, strontium, or zirconium, if it is just manganese, so the amount of shell or the strength of shell or the amount of nuclei getting generated will be less. So that means you definitely need an inoculant to have an improved performance. So without this X, you still can get the amount of nuclei, but it will be less potent or less strong, or it will be fading more. It will start losing its potency more. So when you add this X element, this X can be any of these inoculating elements. When you start adding X to this, you get a better nuclei. You get a strong nuclei and a fade resistant nuclei. This X depends on the requirements of the casting. It varies with casting to casting. Say this X. In a thin section, the requirement will be different. In a thick section, it will be a different requirement. And there are conjunctions where thin and thick sections meet, where hot spots come into picture. There it will be a different requirement. So this X is decided by the casting requirements, and you definitely need this X element. This X element can be from any of these elements which we see. So graphite nucleates on this sulfate. So there is no graphite before this. So we are talking about stage 1 and stage 2 in the liquid stage itself. So graphite is a solid. So all these inoculating elements starts performing, or it should have started performing its function before even the carbon can precipitate as graphite. So we should be, it is like you prepare your metal and keep it ready for carbon to come out and deposit. So these are earlier preparations. So the amount of, as I was discussing previously, the amount of carbon which is going to come out is going to be the same. Say for example, you have melt A and melt B, where melt A has got melt A and melt B have got same composition. You use the same furnace, you have the same tapping temperature, and melt A you have got a barium-based inoculant addition. Melt B doesn't have that barium-based inoculant addition. The difference between these two would be you will not have that X element, and the same amount of carbon is going to precipitate because the carbon content in both the alloys are the same, both the liquid metal is the same. So when the carbon is about to precipitate, the amount of platform or the stability of platform available for the carbon to deposit and start growing, like precipitate and growing in barium based conditions, you will have this manganese and barium complex compound forming a platform. So here the platforms will be more in case of barium based material. Metal without barium based inoculant will have less number of platforms, or we can say this manganese barium platform will be sustained for the entire pouring time. Like you will have liquid metal until you fill the cavity. Your solidification starts inside the mold only. So the first casting and the last casting will have all barium rich, manganese barium rich platforms, where everyone will have similar or same amount of nuclei, or almost same amount of nuclei, and start and the same amount of carbon will start growing with the same amount of graphite. Like equal amount of graphite will be produced everywhere. But in case of metal without a barium inoculant, the amount of the platform reduces, and even for the given amount of, or the same amount of graphite carbon coming out, you will not have same amount of graphite getting precipitated. So this is the reason why pure ferrosilicon or just ferrosilicon cannot be used as an inoculant. It is not a potent inoculant. It is not that it cannot be used in inoculant, but it is not a potent inoculant when you compare other inoculating elements. So this is in ductile ion. So in ductile ion you have got oxygen and sulfur. You have got oxygen sulfur in gray cast ion also. And ductile ion will have more oxygen because you undergo ductile ion treatment which makes it violent. So that makes it more aspiring. So oxygen, nascent oxygen will be comparatively more with ductile ion. So you do a nodalizing treatment where you add all these elements in the magnesium treatment. Then you do inoculation of these things. What happens in ductile ion is, your ductile ion is generally with a core of magnesium and calcium sulfate, which is formed due to or out of your magnesium treatment. On top of it, you have got a silicate shell. This silicate shell, this silicon is supplied or provided by your ferrosilicon magnesium alloy, or from your liquid metal which has got a base silicon. And then you have a substrate here. This substrate is given by the inoculating elements. We'll go to the next slide and see why do you need this substrate. You already have a silicate shell, and as we had seen previously, if there is a shell and there is graphite nucleation happening, in that case, here you already have a shell, then you should have been having direct graphite precipitation on top of this. Why do we need inoculation in ductile ion? Why do we need this separate substrate in ductile ion? The reason is there is a compatibility issue. It means that the graphite which is precipitating, the carbon which is about to precipitate as graphite, will be hexagonal in structure, the crystal structure of the graphite. So this solid should have a compatible platform in which it can attach and then start growing. So when you see the shell which is formed out of the magnesium treatment, it is orthorhombic in nature. This has got a lower compatibility with the graphite forming. So when you see the lattice disk registry, it's just a measure of compatibility, make it in a plain term. So when we see this, if the compatibility of the difference in compatibility is less than 5%, it becomes favorable for the carbon to precipitate. So you see in this, all these green colored substrate, which are generally from inoculating elements, have got a favorable platform. So that means if without this inoculating elements, there are the compound which is formed out of magnesium treatment is unfavorable for the carbon to deposit and convert into graphite. If you have not favorable or unfavorable conditions, carbon coming out will again combine with any other elements present there. It will get converted into combined carbon. So you start losing the effect of having free carbon. So this is the reason why we need special elements like calcium, strontium, barium. And here, when we see the second part of this compound, it is silicate. So you definitely need this silicate for this element to perform. That means with just calcium oxide, you don't get this effect, or with just silicate, you don't get this effect. You need a calcium silicate or calcium aluminate per se. The same way, barium silicate or barium aluminate. So that means you need silicate, and this silicon is provided by your ferrosilicon in the or silicon in the inoculant or silicon in the liquid metal. You get barium also from the inoculant. So this is the reason why just ferrosilicon just without any special elements cannot be a potent inoculant. So what happens when you do not inoculate? You still have carbon coming out, but the amount of graphite or the uniformity of graphite formation starts getting affected. So when you see the graphite morphology in case of gray cast iron, so the preferred orientation, so it can be type A or type C. When you talk of preferred orientation, the preference varies with casting to casting. So let us consider an automotive casting where the type A requirement of a gray cast iron of that particular casting is above 90%. So then for that particular component, for that particular casting, the requirement is type A and it should be more than 90%. And when you do not inoculate, when you add less inoculation, you start getting, you still get graphite, but in a non-preferred orientation. So when you have graphite in the non-preferred orientation, you start getting non-uniform properties, like non-uniform properties in case of hardness, in case of tensile strength, in case of its performance during machining, like machinability, tool wear, these kind of things come into picture. So the same thing with ductile iron also. So when you have inoculated your metal to the requirement level, you will see uniform size of nodules and well distributed nodules. When you have less inoculated or uninoculated metal, you will still get carbon, you will still get graphite, but in a different orientation, like bits and pieces of smaller, bigger nodules coming up into picture. So when you have difference in the nodule size and the nodule distribution and nodule density, your non-uniformity comes into picture, and you will not get uniform properties. And shrinkage tendency is not controlled. So as we see carbon coming out and depositing as graphite, and that graphite expands by volume, starts filling the voids getting generated during the solidification, is going to reduce the shrinkage tendency. Then your inoculation is improper or not inoculated, you are not going to counter the solidification contraction happening, and you are not going to support, or you are not going to produce any shrink free casting. So inoculation is a must for producing a shrink free casting. And your undercooling levels, this is measured generally using thermal analysis, and it is like the cooling rate, or the grade temperature gradient in which the casting solidification happens suddenly goes below because of the unwanted or unexpected compounds forming. So it starts losing heat faster, or it cools down much at a lower temperature than it can cool down. So which is generally compensated by the graphite formation, because graphite formation is got some latent heat coming up. So the system heat increases when graphite is getting precipitated. So that way the undercooling levels are adjusted. So I'll show you a video. So so hope you are able to hear me. Let say this is we'll continue with the presentation. Can inoculation alone guarantee a shrink-free casting? So I'll play that video at the end of the presentation. I'll explain how there has been an experiment where pure water starts getting converted into solid ice at a much lesser temperature than it is expected. So I'll explain that at the end of the presentation. Coming back to the presentation, can inoculation alone guarantee a shrink-free casting? So during solidification, there is a volumetric shrinkage which is bound to occur by altering or adjusting the chemistry, having a good control on the graphitization potential and the solidification rate. We can avoid the shrinkage in the casting. Inoculation actually influences the solidification rate by forming uniformly distributed graphite particles in the given required morphology and increases the graphitization potential. But inoculation alone cannot solve the entire shrink-free casting, or it cannot guarantee, or it cannot give 100% shrink-free casting, because inoculation is a supporting mechanism where you should have had good chemistry control and good methoding. Methoding means the way in which the metal fills and then starts solidifying in the casting inside the mold. So when you have good control over chemistry and good control over method, then inoculation actually can guarantee a shrink-free casting. When there is variation coming up in methoding, or the way it is getting solidified, or the way it is being filled, and the chemistry varies, and inoculation cannot solely support in producing a shrink-free casting. So how do I select best inoculant to suit my process? Actually, this classification is based upon our experiences, which we have seen in our customer foundries and out of our trials. And any inoculant for that matter should work in any metal. But the point is, as the casting complexity varies and as the casting requirements vary, there are specific experiments being conducted, specific inoculants requirement comes into picture. So out of our experience and out of our database and from our customer foundry feedback, for gray cast iron, different process parameters like varying section thicknesses, different inoculation addition, and long and short pouring time, and high and low temperature, the inoculant selection is being done in this way. Like for a thick section, generally people go for barium and calcium based inoculant, and for a thin section, strontium or lanthanum based inoculant. For a very thin section or a thin and thick combination, people go for strontium and zirconium based inoculant, where strontium element has got a potency, like for a given second or for given microsecond, the amount of micronuclei getting generated is more. So for a second stage inoculant, for a inoculant which goes directly close to the mold or inside the mold, strontium based inoculant works in a better way. Like it gives special boost to the inoculation process. So in the same way, you've got different selection criteria where you can have different casting requirements, and then against which different inoculation can be selected. And for any detailed discussion or any any guidance on this, you can anytime write to us, or you can talk to our SNAM representatives. We'll guide you in the establishing the required inoculation process. So we'll get into how inoculants are generally being evaluated. Chill test dated back, it's very old, and it's authenticated, and should not call it as a crude way, but it's very predominant and a very old eminent test available. It is as per ASTM A367. Most of the foundries, gray iron foundries, do follow this even today. And it is just you pour a chill wedge, which is according to the standard, or which is selected. The section thickness of the chill wedge is selected according to the casting thickness and the carbon equivalent we follow. And what is measured is the chill formation. So after inoculation, it is expected that the chill depth should decrease or it should become zero. Like your base metal and final metal, after inoculation, the chill depth should decrease. Chill width or chill depth, both should decrease. And these are the different zones which is formed out of the chill sample. You have a gray cast iron, you have got a mottled iron where you got a mix of white and then gray cast iron, and the edge part is white iron. So after inoculation, this should actually decrease, and this is a measure of inoculation. And then comes the eutectic cell count test. Here, eutectic cell count is a microscopic analysis, and here you take the sample, you cut the sample, and then you do etch it with a special etchant, and then you view it under a microscope, and you start getting the cells like this, and you compare it with the comparison chart available. And more the cells, better the nuclei produced. Better the nuclei produced, better the inoculation effect, and better graphitization. So it is always intended to get more amount of eutectic cell count after inoculation. So this is a conversion chart or comparison chart which is standard, which is available. And then comes the thermal analysis. So people have been using thermal analysis to predict carbon using a CE meter, where you get accurate carbon, and then you include silicon and phosphorus, you start getting carbon equivalent also. The same system is extrapolated to capture the entire cooling rate of the castings till the solidification. So the solidification behavior is used to predict the amount of graphite precipitated or the nuclei present in the metal. So when you use this thermal analysis, what you actually measure for the inoculation effect is the undercooling. So and increase in the temperature arrest points. So graphitization leads to increase in the system heat. So the better graphitization is shown by the increase in the temperature arrest point. So when you see this uninoculated metal and inoculated metal, you have a shift happening from here to here. So that means from base to final, all your temperature arrest point should increase. You should be getting a flatter and a comparatively longer curve. So the length of the curve talks about the uniformity of the graphitization happening. So there are other ways where you evaluate the inoculant. You have got microstructure properties, which is you measure the morphology of the graphite and the distribution of the graphite and carbides percentage when you do etching, and mechanical properties like surface hardness or after machining hardness, and you pour separate tensile blocks, or you take tensile bars from the casting, like cast on or casting down tensile bar, and you do tensile testing of it, and you ensure that all your castings being poured at different heats give you similar or required tensile testing results, like tensile strength and then elongation in the case of ductile iron. Machinability is like uniform machinability, like it doesn't give any surface roughness, or it gives surface roughness or uneven surface finish of the casting, or it ensures uniform or a longer tool life, like the number of castings with which it can be, like the number of castings being measured using a single tool or the insert if you monitor that particular parameter and it is uniform throughout all the castings being poured in a foundry, is an effect of or after effect of inoculation, or is an indication of good inoculation. And if that is uniform, then you can think of going for a high speed or a high feed rates of cutting, so which will improve your productivity. So if your machinability is non-uniform, then you cannot think of making the improvement in productivity. So to get the uniform machinability, inoculation plays a major role. And when you have uniform inoculation, you can think on working about the uniformity and increasing the productivity. Fade resistance of inoculant. The inoculation effect is almost maximum at its initial stage, like the dissolution factor. The immediate dissolution, after dissolution, it starts giving its maximum nuclei. As and when the time or the temperature comes down, the stability of the nuclei comes down, it starts either redissolving into the liquid metal, or two or three or group of smaller nuclei combined to form a single bigger nuclei. So which is again reducing the amount of graphites getting spread. So all the nucleation effect fades with time. So the rate of fading is dependent on several factors. The composition of the inoculant, like what inoculant you use, that determines the fading resistance of that inoculant, and the composition of the metal to which is added. So if you have got an liquid metal which is viscous, or which has got more alloying elements which affects the solidification rate, then the fading effect of these elements also get affected, and the fading resistance of the inoculation can come down. Like cases where molybdenum, chromium, vanadium, these kind of extra elements are being added as requirements. So your fading resistance decreases. Temperature of the metal. As the temperature of the metal keeps coming down, the stability of the nuclei comes down, and the fading of the inoculant increases. So as and when the like it is like at the ladle you have got a better potency, and when it comes closer to the mold, the temperature is slowly coming down, and then your potency comes down. And size distribution of the inoculant. Size distribution of the inoculant governs the factor of dissolution. So when your when you select a wrong size to the amount of metal being to which it is added, your fading resistance also can come down. Cooling rate of the casting. When the casting's cooling rate keeps varying from mold to mold or from heat to heat, your fade resistance, your resistance to the fading or inoculation performance comes down. When you say this graph, with time the effectiveness keeps coming down. When you have a second stage inoculant, you actually boost up to this level, and then you still end up in having an increased effect of effectiveness than this. So that means if you have not had the second stage inoculant, you would have ended up here with least effectiveness. That means the last poured molds could have been bad. So when you have a second stage inoculant, your effectiveness is comparatively increased. And if your second stage inoculant, the choice of your second stage inoculant is good enough, then you can even still maintain a higher level of effectiveness. So this is how your two-stage inoculation or three-stage inoculation, or splitting the same amount of inoculant and adding it in two different locations, give you a better effect. And what is the effect of fading? What does it do? Fading results in undercooling. It gives tendency to chill formation. Chill means white ion, the combined form of carbon getting formed in the casting. You don't want that to form. Reduced number of nodules and graphitization. Less uniform size distribution of graphite. This is in the case of ductile iron. This is in the case of gray cast iron. So when you see, this is out of one of our experiments which we have conducted here. After 8 minutes, when you don't have a special inoculant, or when you don't have second stage inoculant coming up, you start losing your potency, and your inoculation with time, the first casting and the last casting, can end up giving these kind of microstructures. So when microstructures are in this way, definitely the properties are going to vary. So that means in a single heat, I can expect that my properties are going to vary with the first casting and the last casting I pour. So what happens when I add excess inoculant? So inoculation is going to be good. Okay. So can I keep adding, or can I keep increasing my inoculation? So leaving the cost factor, will the increase in inoculation ensure my castings soundness? Actually not. Since the inoculating elements are oxidizers in nature, oxidizing in nature, when you start adding more inoculation effect, more inoculation, you start generating more of oxides, which can lead to formation of dross or slag. So getting out of this dross becomes difficult when it is getting closer to the mold, because as we know, slag removal generally happens at the or after tapping stage. It doesn't happen after transfer or closer to the mold. So when you tend to add more inoculant, when you tend to produce more dross closer to the mold, it can readily get into the mold and lead to slag inclusion. There are ill effects of inoculating elements, like there is a certain limit to which the inoculating element has got a positive effect. Say, for example, bismuth. There is a limit to which bismuth can be added as an inoculant in ductile iron. When the particular level of bismuth crosses, then it starts giving ill effects, like it starts giving carbides and then degenerated graphite in the casting. So it is not that bismuth is a bad inoculant, but bismuth is the best inoculant or good inoculant to the maximum level to which it can be added. So this is a typical scanning electron microscope image. This analysis was conducted at R&D center, our R&D center, where we have observed inoculation leaving dross. We have intentionally tried to increase the inoculation level, and that has resulted dross in the casting. So you see bismuth at this level has given good nodule count. Bismuth, if we start increasing bismuth, you start getting carbides in the casting. And when you have excess TRE in your inoculant or excess TRE in the total system, and if your inoculation is cerium or lanthanum based and you start increasing your inoculation, you can end up getting a chunky graphite in your castings. So cerium and lanthanum inoculants are good in giving good nodule counts, supporting magnesium in giving good nodularity, but excess of this can lead to chunky graphite. And again, titanium. When you see titanium has been used as inoculant, but now use of titanium in the inoculation is getting reduced, because titanium starts giving titanium carbides, which is very difficult to machine, or it has got equal hardness as that of the machining tool. So that means its hardenability or its hardness is very high and difficult for machining. So when you have more titanium, it starts giving interdendritic graphites. That means same if you have been using, or if you are using a titanium based inoculant, then your inoculation increases, in the same amount of graphite gets converted into interdendritic shape, which is not desirable. So increasing inoculation always does not guarantee a good microstructure or good soundness of the casting. And all your inoculants will contain or may contain aluminum, because aluminum takes part in the core formation or the nuclear formation or the substrate formation in the nucleation phenomena. So as we know, when aluminum increases, we start getting pinholes in the casting because of high affinity towards hydrogen for aluminum. So increase in inoculation can increase your aluminum content in the liquid metal and start getting pinhole defects during solidification. And excessive graphite precipitation. See, graphite precipitation should be to the level that the expansion produced by graphite equals the contraction produced during solidification. When the expansion is more than required, it starts working in the reverse way. So it again can give a shrinkage in some other areas which is not expected. So expansion and contraction has to meet. So if that is not equated or it is not in the same level, it starts giving negative effect, and still it will lead to shrinkage also. So we have almost come to the end of the presentation. So far we have been discussing about the past and present inoculation types, and different types and different process of inoculation. What can happen in future is a new process can come up, a totally different types of casting requirement can come up. So totally a new inoculating element can come up, or we would be completely exhausted with the availability of inoculating elements. So we might have to go for a new type of inoculation. So do not worry. We are there for all your requirements, all kinds of casting requirements. So thank you all for patiently listening to us. And now the platform would be open for question answer session. So thank you once again for patiently listening to us. The questions can be posted in the chat box. I'll read out the question and then I'll answer to it accordingly. Yes, sir.
Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, please. Yes, please, sir. So could you please introduce yourselves, please?
How much inoculation we need to use for 1 ton of liquid metal, sir?
Sir, actually, when you talk of inoculation addition rate, it is not about the amount of metal, or the amount of metal is not the actual criteria, sir. If you talk of what kind of casting you make, it is either ductile iron or gray casting and its section sensitivity, and what property you are trying to achieve. It is in case of ductile iron, say if it is a thick section where you are going to target about nodularity, or section where you have got more hot spots where shrinkage prone area is about to be there, then your inoculation percentage has to be more. So it is not the amount of metal which decides the inoculation, it is the property which you are targeting to achieve.
Okay. Actually, we are using both cast iron and LC iron.
Yes, sir. What is the query about, sir? Is it about the cast iron or ductile iron, sir? Any particular requirement, like you are getting carbides in this casting, or low nodule count, or any particular defect which you are trying to resolve?
Not a particular defect, sir. Generally, what is your recommended, sir?
General recommendation.
Sir, see, out of the data we have, or out of our experience with customers, ductile iron people add from 0.3 up to 0.5% inoculation based on the metal conditions, and they do it in two-stage inoculation. There are some people who do single-stage inoculation at the final pouring or final transfer, or people also do two-stage inoculation, like some part in the treatment ladle, some part during transfer. And for gray cast iron, as low as 0.15 or 0.12%, maximum being 0.25%. And this again, there are two-stage inoculations available, sir. And people even in India, they do in-mold inoculation, which they have seen good effectiveness, where your loss comes down. So in-mold inoculation also handily helps you in getting the maximum benefit. So for gray cast iron, generally people go lowest of 0.12, maximum 0.25, and ductile iron will be minimum 0.3, sir, because you got magnesium treatment there, so you need more inoculation.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sir, can you give us some information about silicon carbide?
Sir, could you please reiterate again your question, please? Some information.
Sir, please give us some information on silicon carbide, or how can we use it?
Yes, sir. Silicon carbide it basically contains silicon and carbon. It's a different form of silicon carbon, and this silicon carbide has got a very high melting point. It's say close to, as I had shown in the presentation, it's close to 2700 2800 degrees Celsius. Hence, silicon carbide is generally added to the furnace metal in the similar way you add your carburizer, like you add your coke to your furnace metal only, because carbon's melting point is very high. Same way, silicon carbide also to be added to the furnace, and the dissolution is very slower because of its high melting point, and some gangue material. Gangue means residue, or what we call as ash in like the unwanted material. It is generally present in the metallurgical grade silicon carbide, and people say this amount, when you tend to add more silicon carbide, this gangue material starts increasing and it starts affecting your lining also. And because of these properties, silicon carbide can be added as a source for silicon and carbon, is also a source for inoculation, but silicon carbide might not be a primary inoculating material, sir.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
can we use silicon carbide as a addition instead of carbon and silicon?
Yes, sir. That is a common practice in the foundry, sir. Like people try to replace ferrosilicon and carburizer with silicon carbide. Yes, there is a possibility. You can conduct some trials out of it, and then you can definitely use silicon carbide as a replacement of ferrosilicon or graphite, sir, or carburizer. Yes, you will get.
Sir, apart from lining problem, any disadvantage of the silicon carbide apart from lining?
The problem can be, see, other than this lining problem, what other this thing silicon carbide is like the uniformity in the performance. See, if you are just looking for silicon and carbon, then yes, it can be consistent. But when you're looking for nucleating effect from silicon and silicon carbide, and when you start looking at graphitization potential, like inoculation effect from silicon carbide is comparatively poorer than ferrosilicon based inoculant, sir. So silicon carbide is not as good as a ferrosilicon based inoculant, special inoculants per se. If it is just silicon and carbon requirement, then silicon carbide can be an alternative for ferrosilicon and carburizers.
Okay. And we have to charge it at the bottom of the furnace.
People generally add it to the they add it to the solid charge itself, sir. It need not be directly bottom of the furnace. So
I mean, some solid along with some solid metal.
Yes, sir. Yes. Because
okay. And any losses of if we edit the starting melting, any losses of silicon percentage during melting?
No, sir. Actually, when you talk of loss in silicon, for loss to happen, the silicon should get into the solution, sir. So during melting, that means like until you achieve liquid temperature or the metal is completely liquid, there is no loss to the elements, and there is no loss happening in any of the elements being added. So when it becomes liquid, and the amount of loss which is expected out of silicon will be there with any material. Even if you make a liquid metal with ferrosilicon, or even if you make liquid metal with silicon carbide, your loss on silicon will be the same, because it is a property of the element silicon. It is not about the source of silicon. So
okay. And if it is possible, we can use a little bit silicon carbide and carburizer and pure silicon. Can we use this type of charge?
Pure silicon has got a very high melting point, sir. Pure silicon, you will be facing a loss in silicon percentage, and also pure silicon has got a higher melting point than cast iron operating temperature, sir. And maybe to my knowledge, if I'm not wrong, pure silicon is expensive, sir.
Yes, at present silicon is very expensive.
You know, actually pure silicon is more expensive than ferrosilicon, sir.
Yeah, yes, sir, yes. And one more thing I have to ask, sir. We are adding carburizer and pure ferrosilicon. What will be the weight we can get in casting?
Sir, I didn't get the question.
We are adding 10 kg graphite carbon.
Okay.
And 5 kg silicon, ferrosilicon.
Okay, sir.
So
Out of
that weight, how much weight we get in casting?
Sir, you're talking of the recovery, like how much it would increase.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Generally, say out of my experience and out of what I've seen so far in my experience. Generally, 70 to 75% will be the 65 to 70% will be the recovery for silicon. So when you consider your ferrosilicon containing 70% silicon, then you can consider 90% of the 70%. That means 90% of 70, 60% recovery. So 60 to 65% you will be getting from your ferrosilicon. And carburizer, what experts say is carburizer gives different recovery at different stages. When it is added along with the solid charge, it gives a different recovery. And when it is added over liquid metal, it gives a different recovery. So they say a solid charge gives almost like 70 to 80%. And then when it is closer to liquid metal, it starts giving 40 to 50%. Maybe I might be wrong because I got less experience on this carburizer or ferrosilicon recoveries. Maybe this is what I've heard out of my experience, sir. Maybe you would experts in this field would be able to comment or provide you suggestions better than what I've given you, sir.
Then, sir, last question I have to ask. At present, we are using SNAM high calcium barium inoculant.
Okay, sir.
1 to 3 mm.
Okay.
And in cast iron, we are using SAM isocarb.
Okay. Yes, sir.
0.2%. And in SG iron, we are using 0.5%.
Yes, sir.
So is it enough? And we are getting good result in this percentage of use.
Yes, sir. Sir, see the word enough is equating to the word that you are satisfied with the response, sir. Like if you are able to achieve, say, the amount of inoculation and the type of inoculant, what you have to choose is based on your requirements, sir. Say if you are happy with the nodularity, nodule count, and no carbides, no missionability issue, then that is or it indicates that you are following the right amount of inoculation practice. So
Okay.
we are happy that getting a feedback on the end of the day, and thank you. We'll continue getting that good feedback from you, sir. Hopefully.
Oh, and sir, one more thing, sir. One more thing. We are adding 1 kg in treatment ladle and 900 gram in T-spot pouring ladle. We are adding 1 to 3 mm in treatment ladle. Can we exchange it with bigger size, means 3 to 6 mm in treatment ladle during magnesium treatment?
Yes, sir. Yes. It is. It is actually. It is a good suggestion, sir. We can actually increase the size of the inoculant when it is closer to the furnace. That means when your volume of metal is more, then your size of inoculant can be bigger. That means, say, at the furnace stage, you will be having more volume of metal, and at the pouring stage, volume of metal is less. Let me during transfer, it comes down. So, and also at high temperatures, the dissolution is to be reduced. Like you have to delay the dissolution. So it is better to have a coarser size inoculant. So as you suggested, you can always go for a coarser size inoculant in the treatment ladle. You can have a 3 to 6 mm or a 2 to 6 mm inoculant in the treatment ladle of the same grade without making any changes. And the second stage can be as what you have been following, sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. I've participant from Sandfits have enabled your mic, sir. You can have your question, please.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good evening, sir.
Sir, after 30 minutes holding of metal in furnace,
Okay,
we
sir.
are adding
Sir, your voice is breaking, sir. We could not hear you. Hello?
1% like inoculation.
Sir, your voice is breaking,
Sir,
sir.
we have 1%. Hello.
Yes, tell me, sir, please.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir, please.
Sir, we are having 1%, sir.
Yes, sir.
After 30 minutes holding of metal in a furnace,
Okay.
we are adding 0.1.
Sir, could you please type your
Sir?
question in the chat box, sir, because your voice is breaking. I could not hear you. Or if I'll try to reiterate what you're trying to ask, sir. Like you have a practice of holding metal in the furnace for 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes you are adding 0.1% inoculation. Is that right, sir?
Yes.
Okay. The question, sir, what is the question you are asking? Is that right, or should that be increased, or?
Sir, sir.
See, that is what I was explaining in my presentation, sir. So,
Good.
yes, yes, sir. I get your question. The question is like after holding of the metal in the furnace for 30 minutes, you have a practice of adding 0.1% inoculation. Is that right, or is it good, or does it to be?
Sir, sir.
Is there any requirement of improvement? Okay. I was explaining in my presentation about preconditioning. So preconditioning is what, like when you start holding your furnace, when you start holding your metal in the furnace for a longer time, you start killing your nuclei present, because you charge your returns into the furnace to make it the liquid metal. Your returns will have some graphite present in it, which again can turn into nuclei present in it. So that means your liquid metal from the furnace already has some amount of nuclei present in it, which is going to get added up by the extra inoculation which you are doing in the process. So when you hold the metal, you start using the nuclei which is present in the liquid metal. That means, say for example, if the total amount of nuclei in the casting is 100%, 60% comes from your furnace metal, and 40% is added from by the inoculation you do. And when you hold the metal for 30 minutes, or when you hold for a longer time, any time about 30 minutes, that 60% starts reducing. 60% can become 50%, 50 can become 55% based on the conditions in which you hold. So to get back that or to compensate the 10 or 20% loss, you should be adding some nuclei to the furnace material, which you are already practicing it by adding 0.1% inoculation. But the problem with this is, in your furnace, your temperatures are high, your volume of metal is high. So you, instead of going for inoculant, there are special materials which performs actually with a greater potency than inoculant. Like preconditioner is like a super inoculant, we can call. So that can be added at the same addition rate, say 0.1%, which will give you better effect than what you're right now doing it. So the practice is right. You are trying to save your metal. You are trying to ensure good metallurgical property. But the inoculant, the material which you add, can be a different material which will give you better property. They call it we call it preconditioner. It conditions the metal. Inoculant is a preconditioner, but it's not a protein preconditioner. Inoculant is different and preconditioner is different. You can opt for a preconditioner at that furnace stage, sir, at the same addition rate, like 0.1%. You will see an improvement over your existing practice. Sir, I hope I have answered your question, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sir, any other questions, sir, in the chat box, please? So if there are if there are no questions, then we'll wind up the session, sir. You can anytime write to us to our email ID. You can anytime write to us for any of your technical queries, and we'd be happy working with you to solve all your queries, sir. Thank you once again for all the participants who have paid attention to this webinar in this evening time in the weekend, and hope we'll continue to have healthy discussions over time, and we'll be happy in sharing our knowledge. Thank you all. Thank you.